as we get into this next frontier of digital twins for humans or a virtual human twin, it's the idea of how do we look at a human as a system or a system of systems, and what are appropriate, medically applicable digital emulations of those systems that can be brought together to better understand, not only a model of how that human works, but one of the key things of a definition of digital twin the National Academy of Sciences established was it's got to take real-time input. There's got to be dynamic feedback. So it's a virtual emulation of your physical systems that responds to feedback. What happens when we try this drug? What happens if there is air pollution?
Should you run this race today, every stitch of data will be wrapped into the model, and it'll hand you accurate probabilities of outcomes.
Welcome to AI in Healthcare. My name is Dr. Sanjay Juneja. I'm a hematologist and medical oncologist, also known as the Doc, and I am joined by my co-host, Dr. Doug Flora, who is the executive director of St. E's, ACCC president, and we have a very neat episode for you all today. Maybe something that you've heard about, and it's the concept of digital twins. And digital twins is something that's, really thought of to shape and potentially improve the kind of guesswork that happens in medicine, and especially in an oncology setting where things are dynamic and evolve and have different kind of outcomes. I am joined by two of just the industry's best to help guide us through this conversation. First is Jim St. Clair. He is a gentleman that is a customer innovation advisor. He has trained at the Interoperability Institute, as well as Michigan Health Information Network, and founder of the Digital Twins Health Society. Also with us today is Professor James Fargason, who is a serial entrepreneur amongst many other things, much like Jim, but also the co-founder of DigiTwin Global, a company advancing digital twin technology for infrastructure owners, managers, operators, and he has a very kind of rich history both in getting things from startup phase all the way to enterprise, and can walk us through what the potential of virtual twins are. So, gentlemen, it's very good to have you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Absolutely. James, let's start with you. When somebody says, so what are you doing these days? A digital twin? What is that? How do you explain that at the dinner table? Because I'm sure that's a common question that comes up.
Great question, and thank you for having me. Digital twin, it's a difficult term to define. We ran our first symposium in February of 2025, and we had the individual who coined the term digital twin as our keynote speaker.
Oh, wow.
John Vickers, who did a tremendous amount of work for NASA in the space of digital twinning, the pioneer in the space. So digital twin, which we spent a lot of time defining, is a replica. It's a digital model of reality. And that could span from all types of different replicas. It could be infrastructure, some type of building, could definitely be a variety of things in the medical space. So that said, digital twin, a digital replica of reality, and it's at least 4-dimensional, if not more.
With that said, if somebody is asking you, a physician or someone that's medical, how do you explain a digital twin to a doctor or a patient and why they may be interested? How would you explain that to somebody?
Absolutely. And Professor Fargason had a great introduction there with regards to the history of the digital twin from a NASA standpoint. And essentially, in essence, what we consider in the industry and what the National Academy of Sciences kind of defined for us is a digital twin is a virtual digital representation of a physical system. And to date, there has been, as discussed, many different permutations of digital twins for aviation development, for manufacturing, for facilities. As we get into this next frontier of digital twins for humans or a virtual human twin, it's the idea of how do we look at a human as a system or a system of systems, and what are appropriate, medically applicable digital emulations of those systems that can be brought together to better understand, not only a model of how that human works, But one of the key things of a definition of digital twin the National Academy of Sciences established was it's got to take real-time input. There's got to be dynamic feedback. So it's a virtual emulation of your physical systems that responds to feedback. What happens when we try this drug? What happens if you're in an area of high solar radiation? What happens if there is air pollution? And factor those in as considerations onto your virtual human template.
Man, I'm pretty excited about this topic. I don't know if Jim and James understand this, but Sanjay and I are basically digital twins anyway. We get confused for one another all the time. People think that I'm Sanjay. So this is a topic that's near and dear to our heart, isn't it, brother?
That's right. I mean, it's indistinguishable.
Indistinguishable. Well, guys, we see a lot of this in other fields, right? Healthcare typically lags a bit, but we've seen this in engineering as people are putting up skyscrapers in Manhattan, or McLaren cars are racing around corners that have been simulated thousands of times in Formula One. It's a little messier here in healthcare. The cars, the planes that are flying transatlantically with AI and with digital twins, they're very determinative, and tumors are a little messier. Can you help us understand as oncologists how close we are? Are we 5 years away? Are we 3 years away? Are we doing it now?
In the medical space, it's already in development and it's being utilized. If I may, this week, literally, we are launching a 7-course 1-year program at LSU, the deepest program in digital twin best practices. It'll be a 1-year program for engineers and other stakeholders. One of the sectors is healthcare. We're going to elaborate on the healthcare space. While the driver initially was infrastructure, the driver initially was buildings and interstate systems and train systems and things of that nature. We've committed to a healthcare sector as one of the pillars of what we will cover. And that said, it is maturing. 5 years from now, it will be indispensable.
Yeah, I agree with that analysis completely. And I think, as we've pointed out in the definition, what you consider a digital twin and the state of that digital twin's maturity is really subject to a degree of freedom of interpretation. But if we set the North Star at something like James is alluding to, and we've discussed so far in the concept of a real live virtual human twin, which, oh, by the way, the EU has been pursuing conceptually over the last year and will continue to do so in 2026, it will become indispensable. And I think part of the reason being is that we look at the state of healthcare, not only in the U.S., but globally. We know we have demographic shifts in the availability of clinicians. We know we have challenges with tremendous amounts of information that are, siloed between various electronic health records or your personal apps or some lab someplace. All of that has to be brought together. And so I think there's a greater understanding that at the individual level, managing your own healthcare data and managing those outcomes are of value. We're already seeing kind of the pushback around, well, I use ChatGPT as my personal doc to ask questions. So maybe that's not the right thing to do at this stage. But if we just build upon that theory and say, what can I use for tools in the future to guide my own healthcare decisions or have better understandings of factors in my health? A digital twin, a virtual human twin is something that can contribute to that.
I think what people don't really realize fully or appreciate is when you go to a physician now or a medical setting, you're recommended something like a statin, or maybe an ACE inhibitor or ARB for hypertension or remodeling of the heart tissue. Whatever the case is, you're basing it on generalized data that's very obviously rarely or never used specifically unless you happen to be in the trial that led to that observation or conclusion that something is helpful. And that's what really fascinates me about digital twins is it is not just a matter of what the general observations have shown or the trials, but you're actually able to populate the things that are unique to you and your biology and your physiology and the way you respond to things and how high your heart rate needs to go to climb the flight of stairs compared to somebody else. We're talking about so many elements that can have a tailored applicability to you. And for me, this is the first time I'm wearing an Oura ring. I finally was like, I am not doing nearly enough data capturing for the world that is to come when it comes to digital twins. So I think I have 2 more that are coming to my house of different kinds to say, I need something to be able to really just capture Sanjay in the best, way, or most accurate way possible. What are some of those things that you all think about in the way of, maybe one day this could be populated into a twin that exists out there?
And Sanjay, I'll offer something that's near and dear to both our hearts. You walk in the door with your lymphoma diagnosis and they're going to order an AVBD chemo regimen. Well, that's just great. What are the pharmacogenetics for me personally to know the efficacy of what that AVBD regimen should be? Should I have more D? Should I have more of other aspects of it? Are there considerations around balancing my radiotherapy, which is a digital twin topic we were looking at last year? All of that should be personalized to you and not just say, well, obviously, if I roll my Mercedes into the garage, the mechanic is going to have a different book of procedures to use on that Mercedes, even if it's an oil change, just like the Honda and the Toyota just got, because there are personalization aspects to those mechanics. And a digital twin, virtual human twin, potentially could help contribute to that by having that information about you in the specific analysis.
Allow me to build on that. We can take decades of data. We can take a very heterogeneous capture of data, analog data, data from a variety of different sources, and we can stitch together the reality of you on an individual basis. We can take thousands of data points and allow you to manage by exception. One of the key tools of a digital twin is it filters all the noise and it extracts the critical data to allow you to manage your information by exception rather than being overwhelmed by the data. If I may metaphorically give you some examples related to infrastructure, there are interstate systems with thousands of data points that will tell you whether a rivet in the structure's vibrating too much. It'll allow the engineers to manage that by exception. One of the most profound presentations I saw, the firm was charged or instructed to install a railroad spur underneath an interstate system within the United States. They were able to decouple and move every aspect of that interstate system digitally to see what the impact would be of the rail system. How would it impact the road itself? And that's just not in the present moment. That's over decades of use, a variety of different vehicles, different tonnage, temperature. So we can manage you not just in a static moment, but what happens if the temperature's high? It's seasonal. That's medically how it's going to impact the decision making. By season, by humidity, you name it. A variety of different, should you run this race today, right? Road can do, every stitch of data will be wrapped into the model and it'll hand you accurate probabilities of outcomes.
I mean, when I hear you say that, it's so encouraging to just envision the same exact principle when it comes to giving chemotherapy, as Jim was saying. It's like you're doing therapies against tumors. Now, a little bit of the challenge, which is still doable in my eyes, is you have the individual who has their own pharmacogenomics and their own, metabolisms and enzymes and even the medications they're on. And then you have a very different biology, which is the tumor biology. Not very different because, remember, it came in your body, but it has different properties. And depending on the kind of cancer it is, it responds to things differently, depending on the mutations it has. We have a lot of data capturing when it comes to these things. We do what's called molecular sequencing. We do what's called pharmacogenomics. We do what's called germline testing. So we have all the data elements when it comes to considerations of the factors of outcome. There's no shortage of the aggregate of cancer diagnoses, sadly. My bigger concern is, unlike perhaps things that have to do with the interstate or bridges and things that are, community-based advancements, What's the whole data sharing going to look like when it comes to things that we already know are kind of, kept close to chest when it comes to data and insights? Because it's going to take, I believe, a lot of collaboration and a lot of data, as you're saying, to have accurate models. The more you know, the better you can predict, right?
Sanjay, I was going to ask the same question. I love that you brought that up because I'm worried about this. I'm nerding out and I love the tech, but for James and Jim in oncology, our data is siloed, unstructured. It's even stuck in a PDF pathology report, which thankfully multimodal data can get to. How do you guys think we're going to solve this data fragmentation problem? The digital twin is only as smart as the data it gets. And I'm a little worried. How do we ensure that we're not just creating a digital twin of our own biases?
Yeah, I think there's some preliminary steps forward. There's a really good cancer informatics organization, C4ICC, that I participate in. Would love to promote that. And they've highlighted efforts of like the City of Hope Cancer Center, which is already running 3 and 4 custom local large language models, of which they're taking into account all of these factors. And it's a data science problem first, which is we know what the compute structures are that we require. What we need to do is make sure, A, what type of data do we require for these various inquiries or analysis, and B, how reliable and what is the quality of that data. So in a recent demonstration, they were going over how much progress they've made on colorectal cancer analysis, specifically for Latino populations. They had the demographic information for their Latino patients. They had done various other means of confirming veracity of the data they've collected, and then apply that locally into one or more large language models that they themselves were running. So they weren't just relying on OpenAI or Anthropic, but things in their own computing centers to be able to get better answers and better statistics. Obviously, it's always a work in progress. You don't know what you don't know sometimes until you start doing these analysis. But I think that's evidence of the incremental improvements to answer some of those questions.
Building on that, it's a tremendous concern. Data quality is a concern. Data completeness. Do I have sufficient, competent evidence in order to make an informed decision? What's the accuracy? Also, data ownership, confidentiality. These are critical pieces of building the twin and making sure that we store it properly. Data changes also over time. How do we manage the change and metamorphosis of different data? So, serious issues in building the digital twin, managing the digital twin. The digital twin is not built at one time. It is maintained, and those maintaining it have to have that competency in order to ensure data quality, completeness, the integrity of the data is strong.
And James brings up a wonderful point. I think I referenced this before, but for instance, in conversations in the Digital Twin Consortium, as we talk about digital twin aggregates, which is, do we need to have a digital twin of the tumor and a subsequent digital twin of the affected system that is tumorous, and then a digital twin that is reflective of the environment of the patient with that system? And how do we aggregate those together? Because there's unique disciplined mathematical models that are applied in each case for each of those that are then brought together for a composite aggregate digital twin.
Can I guide the discussion a little bit? We've got a varied audience, guys. We've got a ton of clinicians on here. We've got a lot of industry types, some patients, and maybe to set the table for why we thought this was worthy of its own episode. I want to move to a little bit of questions about clinical trials in oncology. Sanjay and I are both practicing oncologists and cause more toxicities than we can bear sometimes with middling results for a lot of drugs and patients still. The current failure rate for new drug candidates in clinical development is still 9 out of 10. Traditional trials cost $50,000 per participant, take 10 years. And there's a lot of promise, obviously, in your technologies. This digital twin technology has been estimated to reduce control arm sizes by a third. Obviously, that means trials might close 6 months earlier or a year earlier than a 1,000-patient trial. So obviously, heavy investment in this. I see that as a great way to introduce these concepts to oncologists and to the people who treat the cancers. Maybe could you speak to the promise for clinical trial applications of these tools?
I think the organization needs a strategy. You cannot twin everything. You're going to have to rank order the twinning process of all the candidates for twinning, you might end up twinning 20 to 25%. So we're not going to be twinning everything. In terms of patients, sure, you can twin the world, but out of that, what are you twinning? And so developing a strategy in the space of digital twins is important. The promise is, and because you basically want the twin to be the reward to be significantly higher than the cost. A lot of people just gallop to twinning. That's not what we want to do. We want to pull back. We want to collectively as a team plan the twinning process. And we want to discern what will optimize our outcomes. So in that space, I would develop a strong strategy organizationally and then pilot the twinning process and measure its success, its predictability, its utility, and then move to a stronger twinning process, a more comprehensive twinning process. I hope that makes sense.
I think that's great. And just to build on James's point, one of my colleagues and co-presenters when we presented at the HIMSS conference last year on digital twins, Dr. Paul Tibbetts from the VA, retired cardiologist, now supports the VA in technology. He was the one who really introduced me from the doctor's perspective. I wanted to hear an MD say this on the concept of good enough. What is good enough? Can we aim for a 15% improvement, a 25% improvement? I think culturally there's a tendency to say we have to do this better with the idea that we're going to address problems in their full scope. And that's simply not going to be the case. But as all of us here have seen professionally over the years, things improve incrementally. And what are first steps in iterative processes and digital twins, just as James was saying, that we could consider right now? And I'm very proud to be a founding board member of the new Digital Twins for Health Society, founded by Dr. Yun Dang, a medical physicist from Yale. And while, of course, health is in our name, the founding members all largely come from academic and medical research in oncology. So we are looking at applications for digital twins in clinical trials, considerations for radiotherapies and chemotherapies, probably because that's been an area where there's been that kind of analysis and just saying, what could be the first things we could do to step along an extra 10% or 15% of a patient population that we can address and improve life for?
Let me add to that. The twin will allow you rapidly things that would take years in seconds, answer questions on variables that you may not ever consider. Does the time of day matter? Does whatever variable you want to stitch into the model, it will help you make the decision of whether or not to try different tweaks that could significantly make a difference. Metaphorically, if I may, the NASA presentation at our symposium last year, the twin answered the question of what time of day on what day of the month to move a rocket through a door, because the floor height differed radically. And if they had picked another day, they would have spent millions of dollars on an unsuccessful move because it would not have fit through the door. So that blew the audience out of the chair when that presentation was made.
When I hear you say that, there are many things that kind of inflict some moral injury for a clinician, but one of them is when a patient comes and they have a very reasonable study or observational study, what have you, that, hey, I read that if I take metformin or aspirin or some other medication, that there's, a 20% improvement in the efficacy of this drug or regimen, et cetera, et cetera. And I hate having to say, well, we don't have like a prospective trial on that. Or I literally cannot say one way or another whether they should or shouldn't. So I see digital twins being able to answer some questions that we know will just never be able to be studied and yet need and require clarity. So I get excited about that. The second part is also, it finally gets to entertain things that have been criticized. One example, Eric Topol is very vocal about this, is we don't consider the immune system and specific parts of the immune system nearly enough, if at all, when determining what therapies to give for cancer, which we know responds very well and is controlled by your immune system throughout the time of your life. From HLA typing to the antigen expression on your red blood cells during COVID, we learned a lot about this when it came to how people had proclivities to certain symptoms, as well as blood clots, etc. So I think of this ability to have parallel processing and stack these multiple variables, to your point, James, of really being able to toggle on and off and kind of have this multivariate analysis of, does it matter or not? And finally getting some clarity, through this shroud. With that said, it's hard to think of anything better suited for that than AI. When some of the definitions of artificial intelligence are parallel processing and multiple variables at once and predictability and pattern recognition. Speak on, if you can, what advancements in AI really kind of make us most optimistic of powering a 2.0 version of this whole digital twin concept.
So for me, the digital twin is a replica of the universe, and AI is the gravitational wave within the universe. What I have is these reverberating pockets and packets of information that are coming at us. What the twin does is it orchestrates. I'm in the minority, but I'm gaining support that digital twin is bigger than AI. The digital twin is a macro model of reality, and that AI is stitched into the twin. It's one of the variables that's stitched into the twin. If I may also elaborate on the digital twin team, you've got to break down the silos. You have to have experts from a variety of different perspectives. I have had the thrill of being amongst a team of intellectual giants from all different disciplines, engineering, different areas of science. That includes not only biology, but computer science. And then don't forget the artists. Probably our biggest contributors to the twinning and making it digestible, if I would, or resonating with the end user, is we have an army of PhDs in digital arts that are creating desirable twins. Twins in a gaming environment are going to be used more. So we're trying to create twins that make users happy and make them want to utilize the service. So that's what we have to consider a twinning team. You cannot twin alone. That's dangerous. You must build a team that collectively moves us towards the right answer. We're all groping to navigate through complex information and make it more meaningful. Let's leverage the twin to get there with a team that's phenomenal.
Mind blowing. Hey, Sanjay, he was alluding to us when he said intellectual giants, right?
Oh yeah. This podcast,
James, that stuff is mind blowing, and you think about what it will do in things like marketing and focus groups. You can now sample 1,000 people's likely emotional response to a Coca-Cola ad. I think about the way that we might educate our patients and see who can receive the information in which fashion best. But Sanjay, clinically, I just, guys, before I got on this call, I had a call with a 40-year-old mom. She'd got metastatic colon cancer. She is adorable, and we are having the hardest time finding doses for her. I've tried everything. I've tried reducing just about any way we can, Sanjay. And I so wish that I had a way to prospectively guess. I don't want to guess, prospectively predict. And I think the thing that Jim and James are telling us here for our audience, and the reason that this is so cool, is that it's a fundamental transformation in technologies that are allowing this. This isn't just like predicting who's going to become septic, right? That's cool. We're doing that now. We're doing that in our hospitals right now, Sanjay. But this is the next level of taking all those metabolomics we talk about with Lee Hood and the age of scientific wellness, those 5,000 blood analytes and the fecal microbiome and the breath tests and the epigenome, and then running it out 1,000 times, just like EA Sports does, to predict how my fantasy football players are going to act on Sunday. It's crazy. Guys, I'm so excited to have this. My big question is, how are we going to communicate this to the clinicians? Because they start out at a point of no trust, no time, very, very little interest in this concept, but it's so critical to delivery of good drugs, to delivery of better decisions and better outcomes. How do we, because Sanjay and I are trying to get the word out to our audiences to try and decipher what you guys are teaching the world, but in medicine?
Doug, could I take the liberty of just kind of addressing, take a step back and address it, because James laid down some great groundwork in the question around AI. I think it's important to point out the democratization of the technology just where we've been in the last 5 years. A couple of years ago, National Cancer Institute was very heavily invested in the Digital Twins for Cancer Patients program, which brought together seven university research centers, MD Anderson, Sloan Kettering, et cetera, as well as universities that had high-performance computing centers. For the better part of this last decade, conversations around digital twins and digital twins in healthcare and in oncology specifically involved high-performance computing. We've seen a very rapid shift. I've seen a very rapid shift in the last couple of years that allows organizations and universities like James and LSU to move to other academic disciplines to be considered, because now all of a sudden things that were reserved for a high-performance computing center are now on my M4 MacBook on a locally running large language model that I've downloaded from Hugging Face. I plug that in with the latest chipset on a Google phone, a Pixel phone. These are new democratizations of technologies that let us get into some of these things that I think are freeing up and allowing us to apply other academic disciplines in ways that being reserved on just one big, hard-chugging, big iron computing center couldn't do before.
We want twinning that has high impact, and you're talking about a variety of stakeholders. So I have at least 5 stakeholders in the medical space, and what I want to do is have twinning that makes a difference. And I will tell you personally, I enjoy walking to the grocery store. I don't need a Ferrari to get there because it's only 2 blocks away. We have to turn up and down the twin to make it make sense to these different stakeholders. And so I want to provide a twin that has a lot of focus. And when you have a clinician that has a really profound twinning experience, you're selling the twin and its technology to that user, and that stakeholder is important. So as you're building out the ecosystem of your twinning, you include those individuals in the dialogue. You don't hand them the end results and say, use this. They're co-building it with you. And that's a critical piece to successfully twinning.
And another place I think, you can get adoption for things like digital twins that's quite innovative is attack the places that have the highest pain points. For example, I hate treating small cell lung cancer because you have a limited, finite number of options that each time you're wrong, where you deliver this medication or drug, it injures, it causes end organ damage, like where your vital organs are taking a hit, right? Your bone marrow, your potentially your heart, your lungs, whatever the case may be. And you're either striking after 6 weeks and having to change it up, and all you did was at a cost find out that this didn't work, than to try something else. If you can actually populate that into a digital twin, now you may have some idea of something that otherwise is very painful to treat when you're wrong. And mind you, in a second and third and fourth line setting, always less likely to work. It's more likely to fail. It's similar to what I think of as direct-to-tissue testing. So there are companies like Travera and SageMedic, Mammaprint, that actually, test the cancer cells themselves. It's also what's kind of being studied on the side with organoids. But I got very excited about direct-to-tissue testing, but the adoption wasn't as strong because it's like, well, it's different in your physiology of your body. It's different based on what your immune system is and all these other factors that, sure, are very true because it's not just a matter of putting the treatment on the tissue. But a digital twin can stack all of those things together. So to me, it's a more viable, more reflective example of this kind of direct-to-tissue testing with all of these other elements. And thirdly, it doesn't have the complexity of sending a biopsy overnight to some lab somewhere and having to conduct this experiment within 24 hours. There's also a logistical difficulty when it comes to direct tissue testing. And for me, from predicting rejection for organ transplant to all kinds of other things, simulating it, I mean, that just blows my mind.
Cardiac toxicity, pneumonitis, immunotherapy toxicities, just the idea that we might not guess is so exciting for the audience. You can see if you're on YouTube or if you're watching the video of this instead of just listening, how pumped Sanjay looks right now. He's totally geeking out. I love it. This is why it's an awesome topic, and you guys are killing it for this. I guess for our general audience, not the oncologists, I'd challenge you to think about how this might be applied in your own life, like personal trainers. What can I do at the gym that will give me the best results? What can I do with my diet that can do the best results? What's going to happen if I continue to binge drink on Saturdays at Buckeye football games, Sanjay, which I needed to this week? Yeah.
We have a longer season. Yeah.
Yeah.
I definitely want the right amount of information. There are a lot of, you mentioned in terms of, I think you were alluding to information related to my own personal health care and things of that nature. There are a lot of the digital tools I personally have turned off. It's too much information. I don't need all of that information perpetually. And as a matter of fact, I personally don't wear a watch, any type of watch, because it's too much information for me. I don't need to be, what I need is information by exception. What I need is information that's capturing outliers. What I need is information that tells me, hey, pay attention to this. We're now yellow. We're now red. So that's where the twinning, that's where its utility is most successful. I don't need to perpetually send out information. What I need to do is a tool that orchestrates it for me. And our Dean of Engineering said it so beautifully. We were a data poor society decades ago. Now we have way too much data. The tool of the digital twin, and it is a tool, it is not the answer, neither is AI. The tool of the digital twin is to help us manage the data significantly better.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I offer just from the digital health community itself and health tech startups and companies I've been involved in, as we move forward in the future, I always position that we need tools that a 72-year-old dual eligible Medicare, Medicaid recipient are able to easily understand, or if you look at the dynamics of caregiving, that a caregiver, a family member, or a professional can help those people use and make their life better, not just give them more information that they have to sift through.
We had David Pemberthy on for episode 103, and he talked about his Aura Ring a lot. He made the counter argument that even though he doesn't use the data, he wants to have a corpus of data available when we can figure out what to do with it. So he's wearing his ring and not checking it every day. I've got one on too, so that I have some baselines available for my heart rate variability or whatever. I guess as we start to see a greater inclusion for things like pharmacogenomics in commonplace community oncology, I see a ton of promise for twinning there to do more predictive things, because we're just that's not been introduced at the pace I wish it were. Our center's really good. We've got 3 PGX pharmacists full-time. We're testing everybody before anybody gets near any fluoropyrimidines. Sanjay, 100% of the time, well, I think we're at 90% of the time. There are some people who are allowed
That's
to
incredible.
opt out. But yeah, trying to prevent disaster sounds awfully nice to the clinician, just like it does at NASA or McLaren.
And Doug, I'm glad you keep bringing up McLaren, because obviously you must have watched the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix this past weekend, just like I did. Yeah, and in some universities I've talked to, some university offices of the president who are looking at pharmacogenomics, and with PharmDs that are involved, they're just trying to answer the question of how much money are we spending on top-tier pharmaceuticals that only have an efficacy of 30 or 40% for the majority of our population, that don't even work before they're necessarily used. And I referenced this obviously before with chemotherapies. But, if a department of Medicaid is assessing whether or not they should be paying for GLP-1s based on trends in success otherwise, what should we know about those Medicaid populations and perhaps specific demographic information that affects efficacy, which means you're wasting money in doing it in the first place?
I've spent the last year building out models on the return on the investment of twinning. we want twins that yield significant dividends. Now, when we're dealing with individuals, the monetary profit-making piece is subordinate, of course, to their health and well-being. But it is an important component. It may rank fourth, but we definitely want twinning that makes a significant difference. And we want that measurement to be mathematical. We want it to be rid of subjectivity. We have clear outcomes, and we know the utility of the twin. And that's where you want to be. You want to be in that fourth quadrant of high utility, right? And that it's highly usable, where everybody is on board, they're excited about it, and the easeability and feasibility is strong.
James, Sanjay and I, we have a company called Tensor Black, and we get invited in, and it's a privilege to work with a lot of these companies that are looking at digital twinning. There are a lot of pharma companies that are making major investments. The market's supposed to go from about $1.3 billion this year to $28 billion investments in digital twinning by 2030. So it may even be that healthcare is going to catch up because it's a capitalistic society right now, and there is a great opportunity from an ROI for these gigantic pharma companies to save $700 million per drug developed. I think we all win if they succeed at it. Obviously, you guys are probably going to be building the tools, and Sanjay and I are probably going to be telling them that they need them. But maybe can you look 3 to 5 years ahead and talk about practical applications? Where are we going to be? Let's say 5 years, because I think it's going to take a little bit of time for this to get democratized. Where do you see these technologies being in a routine running of a clinical trial in Baton Rouge, Louisiana in 5 years?
Yeah, I think that the patterns are there. For instance, as an example, I'm very pleased to be able to support the dissertation committee for a doctoral student, and she is building a digital twin for clinical trials to use clinical trial data to build a twin that models the trial community to recognize more substantively, where are their populations being left out? Where are a gender discrimination occurring? Where are we not addressing certain ethnic or racial groups well enough for what we could consider adequate efficacy, and building the twins for that? And she's doing it, herself using Python and other tools. I think that represents potential trends that could easily be adopted from pharmaceutical companies to at least apply to say, hey, if we only have a population size of 100, do we have adequate mathematical diversity just based on using this twin to guide things? And James, I've seen you've seen other things too.
In 5 years, I think twinning will be prevalent in the space. I honestly think it's going to be clunky. I think it's going to be misapplied in a lot of cases. I think there's going to be a significant amount of frustration. This is where you want to manage it from 30,000 feet. You want to pull back. And speaking of 30,000 feet, next time you get on an airplane, General Electric is twinning its engines to tell it when to fly, for optimizing fuel, for minimizing wear and tear on the jet engine. That's one of the segments that I did in my personal digital twin course for the university. It was shocking that it's everywhere. It's going to be prevalent. But I think the level of frustration is going to be moderate here, because justified, because there's going to be, again, a lot of excellent twinning, but a lot of clunky twinning that really is not the right fit for the end user. So that said, some tools for your toolbox. You definitely want your strong twinning team, and you want a tremendous amount of planning. I would not gallop to twinning. I would orchestrate. I would write the symphony carefully, and then I would get somebody who knows what they're doing in the space to also co-write it with me before you start playing. And there is my thought in terms of where we'll be in 5 years.
To that point, there's two places I'm familiar with when you speak of planning where digital twinning is being explored. One is radiation oncology planning, where you're just seeing not only mapping it with AI, but actually seeing what would happen to the good tissue around it, what happens to the tumor, et cetera, et cetera. And the other place is radiomics and potentially, therapy change or effect. I don't think I get any text more often than the concern that somebody is watching a lesion. They say, Sanjay, what do you think of this? They're watching this breast lesion, this kidney lesion. And the truth is, I can't say, but when you put it all together and you have hundreds and thousands and millions of people going through this and you're seeing this evolution, one can imagine what then toggling forward on a digital twin, the genesis of this tumor, does it look malignant, does it not, could be very valuable. Now, I want to get to a darker side a little bit on this whole concept. And that is a concern I have of if you can really predict what happens to somebody one day, better than you can today. Insurance companies often are asking us for our medical history, our vitals, all of these elements that they have to best try and predict the likelihood of death for life insurance or disability or what have you. I can only imagine that the technology behind a digital twin would further aid their kind of partitioning of who is a high-risk person to insure or not, etc. Who should own this digital twin? Are there these conversations happening? Can they access this twin of yours and make this even more challenging for those with issues? These are concerns that I think of as far as, ownership.
That is another podcast. That is a very thought-provoking question. I'd have to give it some time to think through. That is deep. That's a pressing question, going back to one of the most alarming concerns in the healthcare space: who actually owns this information?
Right.
And who has rights to access the information?
Because historically, the patients feel frustration that they don't own their data, and it's almost like you're having to sign to get something of yours. We don't want to repeat that with digital twins, Could you subpoena a twin? Digital twin? I mean,
and you don't
crazy.
want a twin to circle back and to the demise of a patient and decision making. That's a deep question. Wow.
Jim, any thoughts?
I'm gonna have to ponder that one.
Yeah, I'll see your darkness and go even darker, which is just to posit back. As my understanding, and I've read numerous cases, that actually healthcare plan actuarials are very good at knowing exactly when you're going to die or what your conditions could be. And to this discussion, they are, because not only do they have, legitimate authorized access, in air quotes, from the health plan that you're participating in. So much of your data is collectible, either in anonymized and reassociating formats, or collected from data brokers across the country. And I think there's the Netflix documentary that talks about data brokers. I just don't think people really pay attention to just how much of their digital footprint is collectible and available for everybody. And they're already economically incentivized to pull together things. And to your question, I guess, who should own the digital twin? Working together collectively around incremental development and understanding what's messy and what's not is probably going to be crucial. And this is probably, hopefully, the right sort of group of collaborators for being able to do that in a neutral sort of academic format. And not allow it to just be taken over by some industry segment.
How fascinating. Could an entity compel you to twin?
Yeah.
Could a patient be forced to twin? What a thought-provoking. That's wow. I need to think through all of that.
I mean, what if the price of your insurance is discounted by 40% if you agreed that they can digital twin during, the entire time. But then later that, bites you. And I mean, it's just these questions.
That's fascinating.
If you're a lawyer listening, this is an interesting, area of law to start to learn about.
And we're heading down this path already, right? I mean, Allstate will give you a good driver discount if you plug a chip in that lets them track
your data.
You drive. Well, that's 2025. What happens in 2032 when it means collecting everything about your metaphysical state while you're driving around and that what happens to that data?
Hey, Sanjay, think about this. In the last 10 years, we've seen patients, well, even in the last, say, since October 22 with LLMs, patients are coming in with reams of data, really good questions. Is it going to be weird 10 years from now for a patient to come, bump phones with us and say, run the chemo on my twin first, because they have an avatar that's democratized in their phone? Yeah, I mean, it's really, really cool to think about this.
I think that we have a tremendous amount of opportunity, and I'm excited about the future in this space. I am.
It's a simulation of a simulated world. It's like it's simulation squared. Half joking. depending on string theory or not. Can either of y'all speak on how quantum maybe plays into this, whether it's processing power and the ability to have these very multivariate analyses, or quantum entanglement even? Like, what if the simulation is without entanglement and the reality is anything to this front, just to shoot my shot?
Yeah, I'll, for full disclosure, have been kind of working on a working paper concept and exploring some partnerships to examine this, with the premise being, as we've discussed here, there are so many large data sets that, what they call multi-combinatorial factors comes into play. And to keep the answer brief, I think the promise is around quantum simulation, which is quantum algorithms, quantum processing with traditional computing models working with AI, where no matter how sophisticated your AI is and how big your digital processing is, there's still challenges with very, very big data sets like multiomics and proteomics and genomics as factors. So what could that do to build upon analysis that contributes better to your twin?
There's this healthy skepticism in our field, guys. We're dealing with life and death and not code. I guess for our audience, I want to bring it home too, as we get close to closing. But Sanjay and I we talk a lot about our moral injury, don't we, buddy? And how we feel limited. If this technology can save even one patient from a toxic therapy that wasn't going to work anyway, or bring a life-saving drug to market 1 year earlier and save those 6,000 women who died before we identified Herceptin for HER2/neu or the equivalent in 2028, I think it's a moral imperative to try and figure it out. So I credit you guys for doing the hard work. Sanjay and I are going to continue to spread the word. I would say I would love either one of you or both of you to collaborate on a thought piece for AI and precision oncology. We would publish that as invited editorial content to share what we've talked about with a broader audience of people that are leaning forward, that are curious and want to know the risks and the benefits. But I credit you guys for looking into the future a little bit, because it's not quite where we want it to be in healthcare, but the promise is as great or greater than everything we've talked about at McLaren, at GE, and crash test dummies.
I mean, we just want to be wrong less, Doug, and that's what physicians want. It's like the moral injury comes when you're wrong, even if it was the right choice, but that's because predictability is limited.
As you journey towards better results, better outcomes, pull back and build your digital dream team. Whether your sport is football, soccer, it's going to take a dream team. It's going to take a mathematician. It's going to take a chemist. It's going to take a physician. It's going to take an electrical engineer. You're going to have a collage of intellect building this out. And it's mandatory. Even the best players in the world don't score the goal without a well thought through team. So when we're twinning, think through that. And I think you will realize significantly better results.
I love it. Gentlemen, where can we find more information? I know you both are leading huge, organizations and information think tanks. Let us know where we can find more.
So January of 2026, I think it's January 20th and 21st, will be the first annual meeting of the Digital Twins for Health Society, www.dt4hs.org, and look forward to seeing everybody in Houston to discuss further.
February 11 and 12, we will have our Digital Twin Symposium. That will involve a crash course in digital twinning for a half day on the 11th of February. The 12th will be a full day of digital twinning in all sectors, including healthcare. Digitwinglobal.com, digitwinglobal.com. Hope to see you at the symposium. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you. Yes.